Hello everybody, and a very warm welcome to the second of our webinar series where we'll be looking at how to adapt communications to the new world of remote working and social distancing. In short, now is the time for all of us to take our brand communications properly online. Websites, pitch decks, thought leadership content, press releases and investor calls that work much harder in order to connect and engage in a much more powerful and crucially online way. So it's never been more important for a firm's core proposition, its capabilities, its USPs to stand out, to own some space. This means ensuring that you can identify areas of white space where your firm can really own the conversation. In short, so that you can win category authority. In this webinar, we're going to look at how to do this and introduce our white space framework, an approach for identifying topics and themes that the firm is best placed to own. Today, we introduce a tried and tested 5-step process. Step 1, baseline audit, some research. Step 2, taking that into a messaging and content workshop. Step 3, white space analysis. Step 4, creating category authority content campaigns. And step 5, tracking and learning. So the best place to start is to revisit company goals, objectives, and marketing strategy to confirm what outcomes the messaging and the content is designed to help achieve. With these firm-wide and marketing goals in mind, it can also be extremely relevant to benchmark your firm's perception and brand presence against the industry and versus competitors. We look at 10 integrated marketing metrics, including brand awareness, messaging effectiveness, share of voice, media sentiment, Google page 1, social media effectiveness, search engine optimization, website effectiveness, paid search, and paid media. What this analysis helps show is areas of strength, areas of comparative opportunity, and room for improvement, for example, the low-hanging fruit, as well as actionable competitor intelligence, e.g. which capabilities or geographies are peers putting budget behind. So looking at this example diagnostic, firstly, a good share of voice there, a score there, creates an increased potential for landing messaging and winning category authority around focused content ideas. The website effectiveness score, on the other hand, is low. The website is not optimized for content. This is an easy fix. So this is an example of low-hanging fruit, something that can be fixed easily. The third thing, social media effectiveness score is low. This is something you want to track and improve because you want to see engagement going up as campaigns progress to demonstrate that the content is working well. So we've covered quite a lot of ground there. So I think it's a good time to pause for a question focused around this. And I've got a very relevant question here from Jen. Can you explain what the different metrics assess? And that's a good one for Josh there.
Thanks for that question, Jen. It's definitely really helpful to clarify this. I think if we start at the top of the radial chart on this slide, you'll see brand awareness. For this metric, we look at the absolute volume of Google search for a brand and then compare this against our industry-wide data. Then going down, we have messaging effectiveness, which assesses the change in this brand awareness over time, showing how well your marketing activities are growing your brand. Going down again, we see media sentiment, which looks at the ratio of positive versus negative media sentiment in Tier 1 media. Then we have website effectiveness, which looks at things like bounce rates, time spent on the site, and the average number of pages viewed. Then again, we have GP1, which is an acronym for our Google Page 1 metric, a proprietary Peregrine metric, which assesses the amount of owned and positive content on the first page of Google for a brand's main search term. At the bottom of the chart, we have share of voice, which measures how much Tier 1 media coverage a firm has been able to gather for itself versus its peers in the wider industry. Then we have social media, which assesses a firm's presence, its reach, and its engagement across the core 3 social media channels. And then going up, we have SEO, which assesses how well a firm's website is able to bring in non-branded search traffic, i.e. how well matched is the content you have to bring in users who aren't necessarily looking for your brand in the first place, but the content you have is well matched to their needs. Finally, we have paid search and paid media metrics, which look at the scope and reach of firms' paid distribution, both through online paid media, including paid social, and also through Google Ads. So I appreciate that this is a rather quick overview. So for anyone who actually wants to find out a bit more about this, you can visit the global100.com, which is where we host our Global 100 research into the asset management industry, and you can also find a more in-depth overview of our methodology on that site as well.
Thanks, Josh. So the next part of the baseline audit is reviewing all existing messaging and content. So this is all your existing messaging content on websites, in press releases, in blogs or white papers, in slide decks, in videos, etc. And this is in order to identify and collect any information around positioning, the elevator pitch, the key messaging that's been used, the keywords that have been used, topics that have been focused on, themes that have been picked up, etc. So this, combined with company goals and industry, competitor and industry benchmarking information, can then be brought into the messaging and content workshop. So step 3 is to take this analysis into the messaging and content workshop. It's essential that the key principals and spokespeople are involved, as they really need to own the messaging. So in the workshop, identify your key audience segments, their user journeys, touch points or channels, their hot buttons, their needs, their pain points. With this audience in mind, identify your core capabilities, your differentiated edge, your unique selling points, and aim to summarize this into an elevator pitch. The elevator pitch is 1 or 2 sentences you would say to a member of your audience if you had just 30 seconds in the elevator. And in that short time, you need to communicate your core idea or your core proposition, if you like. To support this core proposition, you need to identify 3 message pillars that further substantiate the elevator pitch. And supporting these are proof points for each. Proof points like reasons to believe. These could be data, case studies, anecdotes, etc. And crucially, these proof points provide the ideas and the fuel for marketing content. As you develop these messages, it's also important to identify keywords, topics, and ideas you want to associate with, and also that compare this to key messages, keywords, and phrases that competitors are using. The next step is to find the white space analysis, and I will hand over to Josh to explain how we approach this.
Thanks, Hat. As you can see from this simple diagram, finding the white space is an absolutely critical component of creating category authority. At its core, finding white space is about making sure that your marketing, your communication, is really built on themes and topics you can actually own, both in terms of the media conversation, but also in terms of the online search engine real estate. There are plenty of ways of trying to find white space that match up with your core capabilities. You can do peer analysis, you can see what your competitors are doing, you can assess which keywords they own and which ones you think could be up for grabs. You can also A/B test potential themes with your audiences. Peregrine's approach to this is built around our white space framework. We've developed a really simple framework that lets us compare the proportion of tier 1 media coverage on particular themes versus the proportion of organic demand that we see for those topics. And to do this, we're looking at things like social media engagement and also Google search volumes. This way you can see which themes are under or indeed over-indexed by the market already. The great thing about this approach is that you can really start to drill down into different regions or even get more granular with sub-themes within a wider topic. However you sort of want to go about finding white space, the most important thing is that you're able to have as much confidence as possible that you're going to be putting budget behind building campaigns around the most powerful themes available. So when it comes to executing successful content campaigns, I think the steps are fairly simple. Once you've identified the white space that matches up with your firm's differentiated edge, the next step is to decide which types of content you think will best communicate these stories and these ideas to your audience. The really important thing here is to work out which content and obviously the supporting materials will best tell this story. Do you want the centerpiece to be a white paper or an infographic on a dedicated landing page? Is it a profile opportunity with FTFM? It could well be all of those 3 things. Once you've defined that content, the next phase of the execution process is distribution. You know your audience and you know their user journey, and you know which channels are going to be most effective in actually reaching them. It could be any combination of email mailouts, social media promotion, media story, paid media, or even paid search as part of that package, built into one integrated campaign. And right now, of course, lots of people are also thinking about things like webinars. Lastly, once the campaign has actually been launched, you need to track engagement really rigorously so that you can measure its success and critically feed those insights back into your next campaign. So through tracking, I think you can get a lot closer to best practice. It'll show what works and it'll show what doesn't work for you in helping you actually meet your objectives. From Peregrine's own tracking that we do across the asset management industry and the research we pull together, there are a number of best practices that have emerged over the last few years. I think the first thing to say is that campaigns need to be really focused, and they need to be deeply connected to your own brand identity, and they need to offer real insights to the audiences that you serve. The second thing is to think about the campaigns as a way of breaking out of your current level of brand awareness. It's about creating a campaign that's not just business as usual. We call this a pattern interrupt campaign. The third thing is it's all about quality over quantity. When we look at what marketing activities actually grow firms' brand awareness over time, we see really clearly that a smaller number of more focused, punchier campaigns have just far more impact than larger numbers of smaller ones. And the last thing is it's about making sure that the campaign is properly integrated across key channels in a way that really generates an impact that's greater than the sum of its parts. So what does this look like in practice? I think a really great example of pattern interrupt and creating category authority is Baillie Gifford's recent actual investing campaign. It really exemplifies many of the best practices that we've just touched on there. I think firstly, one of the reasons why this was so good is that it was a really clear objective to define how investors perceive Baillie Gifford, moving the firm away from a perception that, in their own words, was of being a slightly dour, long-only Scottish manager to something much more dynamic than that. The campaign messaging turned the sort of very tired and stale narrative of active versus passive on its head, making the argument that the only thing that really matters is actual investing. This messaging was then delivered to the market through paid media, updated website content, and of course the main thrust of the campaign was delivered through two really focused profiles in the FT and Reuters. Most importantly of all, we saw really tangible results from the campaign, with brand interest in Baillie Gifford increasing by 50% during the campaign. And brilliantly, we also saw it creating real category authority, with a huge increase in people actually searching for the term actual investing, an increase of several orders of magnitude during the campaign. So obviously, a burning question right now, as we're in the midst of the coronavirus crisis, is going to be, do we have to completely rethink all the content calendars that we've been so busy putting together since the beginning of this year? I think to answer this question, we've put together a really simple diagram that outlines our general rule of thumb here. Broadly speaking, you can put your content into three main buckets: business as usual content, e.g. appointment announcements; content campaigns, where it's more about thematic content and insight; and finally, year-defining campaigns, the sorts of news flow or indeed content that will define how people remember 2020 for your firm. Now, broadly speaking, the choice set in front of us is pretty binary. Either we're going on as usual or we have to delay to another time. For the first two types of content, in most cases, we'd recommend continuing as normal and not delaying. Your clients and stakeholders are actually, right now a captive audience with unprecedented amounts of time and space for reading and thinking and consuming the content and news that you're going to share with them. The key thing to think about here is whether you need to distribute differently to make sure it's still going to get in front of them while they're working from home. So you do need to do a little bit of an extra think around the user journey there. And then for the third category, what we'd call year-defining content, we would suggest waiting for this in most cases, as your corporate story is probably going to get lost in the maelstrom of coronavirus-related anxiety right now. One thing to think about here is that everyone else is going to be thinking the same thing, so you need to make sure that you're happy that the content you have is really good enough to stand out when the time comes.
Fantastic, Josh. Thank you for that. So it's time for some questions. I've got one here from Bill. What do you mean by a pattern interrupt campaign? Josh, would you answer that?
Yeah, thanks, Bill. I think when it comes to defining pattern interrupt campaigns, I think there are two key components for us. I think the first thing is it needs to be a properly integrated campaign. And when I say integrated, I don't mean that it necessarily has to be all the bells and whistles and omni-channel and huge budget behind it. What we mean is that it's smart in the sense that for the objective you have, you've really taken an integrated approach to assessing which of the various channels you could go out across are going to have the most impact with your audiences. And then the second component is, and a critical component, is that it can't be just business as usual. So it needs to generate an outsized increase in brand awareness. And for us, the threshold there is that the increase in brand awareness needs to spike by at least 20%. I hope that answers your question.
Fantastic. Another question here from Anne. Can you give me an example of applying white space indexing in the real world?
Yeah, thanks. And that's a great question. I think it's really important to, bring things back down to the concrete. And I think a good example would be from some research we've recently been doing around ESG. We've actually found that when we look at the white space in the ESG conversation, we found that the topic of active ownership had actually 30% more organic demand for this topic proportionally than there is currently relevant content being provided by managers in tier one media. So I think this is a really great example of an area of white space that for those managers with the core capabilities to match up to that topic to go away and own that space.
Fantastic. So last question here from Caroline. Most of us have been through the painful process of creating corporate or product messaging. In your opinion, what makes the difference between weak messaging and great messaging? So thanks for that, Caroline. We think the critical thing is to be really, really rigorous in following a process that aligns all your stakeholders around the things that really set your firm apart. It's important to remember that you can't be good at anything. Part of the message, be really honest with yourself about what really makes the firm different and what makes it stand out. And that is essentially what makes the real difference. And so we've run out of time now. So thank you very much indeed for attending. We hope that you found this webinar useful and actionable. In our next webinar, we're going to cover crisis media communications in a COVID-19 world. We've noticed that because there is so much going on, it's creating more mistakes than usual. For example, this week we had a Wall Street Journal headline which made it look like the affected firm was gating investors. This was extremely wrong and it was extremely damaging. So in that webinar, we're going to be looking at what can be done to prepare and how to react to prevent reputational damage. And the answer is you need to react very, very, very quickly indeed to prevent these stories contaminating lots of other media. So in the meantime, please do get in touch with any questions. Needless to say, we're on full alert and ready to move quickly to support your mission, to power up your communications at this very crucial time. Please, if you do have a moment, fill in our survey. We'd really gratefully appreciate that. And in the meantime, goodbye for now from all of us at Peregrine in London and New York.